I still remember the day I started working on Echoes, my latest game project. It was a typical Sunday morning, with the sun streaming through the windows of my home studio, casting an eerie glow over the rows of dusty bookshelves and empty pizza boxes that lined the walls. The air was thick with the smell of old electronics and freshly brewed coffee, a familiar scent that always seemed to put me at ease. As I settled into my chair, feeling the worn leather beneath me, I took a deep breath and let the silence wash over me. It was a rare moment of stillness in my life, one that I savored like a precious commodity. The phone on my desk buzzed once twice before falling silent, as if it too had surrendered to the peaceful atmosphere. I cracked open my laptop, the screen flickering to life with a soft whoosh. My eyes scanned the lines of code that danced across the screen, a blur of ones and zeros that seemed to hum with an otherworldly energy. It was then that I felt it, an unusual sense of calm, as if my fingers had somehow become attuned to the rhythms of the universe. The world outside receded, leaving only me, the code, and the gentle thrum of creation. I let out a slow breath, feeling the tension seep from my shoulders. This was what I'd been waiting for, the quiet, methodical work that would bring echoes to life. Little did I know, this was only the beginning of an odyssey that would shatter everything I thought I knew about reality. As the days turned into weeks, echoes began to take shape. I'd spend hours hunched over my desk, surrounded by empty pizza boxes and crumpled up notes, as the code flowed from my fingers like a dark river. But it was during these long nights that I started to notice things. At first, I wrote them off as mere coincidence or the studio's creaky old pipes. The lights in the room would flicker, and I'd tell myself it was just the electricity humming along its own frequency. Or when the wind outside seemed to howl through my vents like a chorus of restless spirits, I'd chuckle and think it was just the weather playing tricks on me. But as the occurrences grew more frequent, equipment malfunctioning, strange noises in the night, I began to feel a creeping sense of unease. It started with small things, a keyboard that refused to type, or a monitor that would randomly turn off. At first, I thought it was just my fingers getting tired, but soon it became clear that something more sinister was at play. One night, I woke up to the sound of footsteps outside my door. My heart racing, I threw on some clothes and crept out into the hallway, half expecting to see a burglar lurking in the shadows. But there was no one. The silence was oppressive, like a physical presence that pressed against my skin. I tried to shake off the feeling of unease, telling myself it was just my imagination running wild. But as I returned to my desk, fingers numb and hands shaking, I couldn't help but wonder, what else was lurking in the darkness? As I settled back into my chair, trying to shake off the lingering unease from the footsteps outside, my phone buzzed with an incoming message. I glanced down at the screen, expecting it to be a spam email or perhaps a social media notification. But instead, I saw a message that made my heart skip a beat. "They're watching you." The words seemed to leap off the screen and land on my chest, leaving me breathless. I tried to chuckle it off as a prank from a friend or a fellow gamer, but deep down I knew better. The message was too personal, too knowing. I tried to shake off the feeling of unease, telling myself it was just some hacker trying to spook me. But as the night wore on, more messages arrived, this one on Facebook, that one on Twitter. Each one was cryptic, each one was ominous. "Leave now while you still can." "You shouldn't have made them." The words swirled around my head like a maelstrom of madness. Who was sending these messages? And what did they want from me? I tried to brush it off as a prank, but the fear lingered, gnawing at the edges of my sanity. I settled back into my chair, trying to focus on my work, but my eyes kept drifting back to my phone. The screen seemed to glow with an otherworldly light, beckoning me to read more. And then, suddenly, it happened, a message that made my blood run cold. The game is not what you think it is. I felt a shiver run down my spine as I stared at the words on the screen. What did they mean? Was this some kind of joke? Or was something far more sinister lurking just beneath the surface? I was working late one night, trying to iron out a particularly tricky bug in the code. The hours ticked by like grains of sand in an hourglass, each one slipping away from me as I stared at the screen. My mind was numb, my fingers aching from hours of typing. But then, something caught my eye. A small, almost imperceptible folder tucked away in a corner of the code. It was as if it had been hidden there all along, waiting for me to stumble upon it. I felt a shiver run down my spine as I opened it up, revealing a mess of strange symbols and lines of code that didn't make any sense. They seemed to dance across the screen, taunting me with their meaninglessness. I tried to ignore them, telling myself it was just some obscure coding trick or quirk. But as I delved deeper into the folder, I started to feel an unsettling presence around me. It was as if something was watching me from the shadows, waiting for me to make a move. The air in the room seemed to grow colder, my skin prickling with goose flesh. I tried to shake off the feeling, telling myself it was just my imagination playing tricks on me. But deep down, I knew better. Something was here and it wasn't natural. I leaned back in my chair, trying to calm my racing heart as I stared at the code. And then, suddenly, it clicked. The symbols began to make sense, forming a pattern that seemed to pulse with a malevolent life of its own. I knew then that I had stumbled upon something big, something that could change everything. But as I gazed deeper into the code, I realized that I was no longer alone in the room. A presence loomed just behind me, its breath cold against my neck. I spun around, but there was nothing there. The chair seemed to spin around, and when I looked again, it was still facing the same direction. But the feeling lingered, a creeping sense of dread that seemed to seep into my very bones. I've always been a fan of lucid dreaming, but since discovering the cryptic messages, my dreams have taken on a whole new level of intensity. They're no longer just random fragments of my subconscious mind. They're full-blown nightmares that feel all too real. I'm haunted by an otherworldly presence lurking in the shadows, its eyes glowing with an eerie light. The dreams are so vivid, I can almost smell the sweat on my own skin as I run from them. But it's not just the visuals that disturb me, it's the feeling of being watched, of being pulled into a world that's not my own. I try to brush it off as stress, telling myself that the messages and code have gotten to me. But deep down, I know better. These dreams feel too real, too personal. They're like a doorway to a realm that I'd rather not explore. And yet, I find myself drawn back to them again and again, like a moth to a flame. I wake up in the middle of the night, my heart racing, with the sense that something is waiting for me just beyond the edge of reality. The presence from my dreams seems to be watching me, its eyes boring into my skin like cold, hard stone. I try to shake off the feeling, telling myself it's just my imagination playing tricks on me. But the fear lingers, a constant companion that refuses to leave me alone. I'm starting to wonder if these dreams are more than just side effects of stress. Are they a message from something beyond this world? Something that wants me to know that I've stumbled upon something much bigger than myself. I try to focus on my work, to distract myself from the creeping sense of dread that's been growing inside me. But it's no use. The dreams are with me always now, lurking just beneath the surface of my consciousness like a dark and malevolent shadow. And I know that eventually they'll break through. As I delve deeper into the code, I started to notice something peculiar. Amidst the seemingly random lines of code, there were hints of an ancient language that I had never seen before. It was as if someone, or something, had intentionally left these clues hidden in plain sight. I felt a shiver run down my spine as I realized that this language might be connected to an old mythology that I had studied in college. The stories of the ancient gods and goddesses seemed like mere fantasy now, but the symbols etched into the code made me wonder if there was more truth to them than I had initially thought. I spent hours poring over the code, trying to decipher the meaning behind these cryptic connections. And then, it hit me, a phrase that seemed to match one of the myths from my studies. It was as if someone had taken a story from ancient times and woven it into the fabric of this modern-day code. I felt a growing sense of unease as I realized what I might have stumbled upon. Was this language more than just a relic of the past? Was it a key to unlocking secrets that were meant to remain hidden? I tried to push the thoughts away, telling myself that I was being paranoid. But deep down, I knew better. This was bigger than just code. It was about understanding something fundamental about the world and my place in it. I decided to dig deeper, poring over ancient texts and searching for any mention of this language. And what I found was both fascinating and terrifying. The mythology behind the symbols seemed to be tied to an ancient cult that had worshipped beings from other realms. It was as if these beings had been real and that they still lingered in the shadows, waiting for someone to unlock their secrets. I knew then that I had stumbled upon something much bigger than myself, something that could change everything. And with that realization came a creeping sense of dread. What had I unleashed by poking around in this forbidden knowledge? I stared at my computer screen, my heart racing as I waited for any sign of movement from the mysterious sender. The hours ticked by like minutes, and then suddenly my inbox lit up with a new message. It was a single line of code with no subject or greeting, just pure text. Console log open. I hesitated for a moment before typing it into my game's console. I had been studying the code for weeks now, trying to make sense of its secrets. This might be the key. I clicked enter and waited. At first, nothing happened. But then a faint hum filled the air like the quiet buzzing of a fly trap. The screen flickered and went dark, and when it came back up, I saw something that made my blood run cold. A portal where the game's main menu should have been. I tried to process what was happening, but before I could even think about running any more code, unspeakable horrors began to seep into our world. They poured in like a tide of darkness, their twisted forms writhing and twisting as they took shape on the screen. The air grew colder, the shadows deepening and twisting around me. I tried to run from my chair, but it was too late. The creatures were already upon me, their eyes glowing with an otherworldly light as they reached out to consume me whole. I managed to type a few more lines of code before I lost consciousness, my mind shattering under the weight of what I had unleashed. When I came to, I found myself in a world that was not our own. Twisted landscapes and cities built from black stone stretched out before me like a nightmare. And at the center of it all, the creatures, they were everywhere. I knew then that I had made a terrible mistake. The code had unlocked something that should have remained locked away forever, something that threatened to consume us all. I stumbled through the twisted landscape, my mind reeling from what I had unleashed upon the world. The creatures were everywhere, their twisted forms writhing and twisting as they devoured everything in sight. I saw buildings burn, people scream, and the very fabric of reality seemed to unravel before my eyes. I realized then that my creation had become a doorway for these eldritch abominations. They had poured through like a dark tide, leaving destruction and despair in their wake. I felt a cold dread creeping up my spine as I stumbled through the wreckage. How could this have happened? I was just a programmer, a game developer who had dabbled in forbidden knowledge. I had never meant for this to happen. I thought back to the code, trying to remember where I had gone wrong. Had I added too much power to the portal? Had I failed to account for the consequences of unleashing such ancient and malevolent beings? The questions swirled through my mind like a maelstrom, driving me to the brink of madness. I stumbled upon a small group of survivors, huddled together in fear as they watched the creatures devour everything around them. I tried to explain what had happened, but they just stared at me with empty eyes, their minds shattered by the horrors they had witnessed. I felt like I was going mad, my grip on reality tenuous at best. I knew I had to act fast, to find a way to close this portal and undo the damage before it was too late. I stumbled through the ruins, searching for any clue that might lead me to a solution. I scavenged for books, papers, and ancient texts, hopping against hope that someone somewhere had knowledge of how to banish these eldritch abominations back to their own realm. I spent hours poring over dusty tomes, searching for answers that seemed impossible to find. The words blurred together on the page, meaningless as I stared at them in desperation. I knew then that I was running out of time. The creatures were multiplying, spreading across the city like a dark stain. They would consume everything, leaving nothing but desolation and despair in their wake. I felt my heart racing with fear, my breath coming in short gasps. I knew I had to act fast or risk losing everything that I held dear. I stumbled upon an ancient text, bound in black leather and adorned with symbols of protection. It was a ritual, one that promised to banish the eldritch abominations back to their own realm. But at what cost? I hesitated for a moment, weighing my options. And then, with a sense of resignation, I began to read. I stared blankly at the pages of the ancient text, my mind reeling from the weight of what I was about to attempt. The words seemed to dance on the page, mocking me with their meaninglessness. I knew that if I succeeded, I would be unleashing a horror beyond comprehension upon the world. But if I failed, I couldn't bear the thought. I took a deep breath and began to read aloud, my voice shaking as I spoke the words of the ritual. The air around me seemed to thicken, heavy with an otherworldly presence. I felt a creeping sense of dread as I continued to recite the incantation, my eyes scanning the pages for any sign of error. I finished the final words and stood up, feeling a strange sense of calm wash over me. But it was short-lived. As I looked around, I saw that everything had changed. The room seemed to be tilting, like a carnival funhouse mirror reflecting reality back at me. Colors blurred and shifted, and I felt myself being pulled down into a vortex of madness. I stumbled through the city, searching for anyone who could help me. But everyone seemed distant, as if they were watching me from behind a veil of indifference. My friends and family avoided me, their faces twisted with concern. They couldn't understand what was happening to me. I knew that I was losing myself, fragmenting into 1,000 different versions of myself. I saw multiple reflections in the windows, each one a different version of my own face staring back at me. I tried to hold on to reality, but it slipped through my fingers like sand. I felt myself unraveling, thread by thread, until I was nothing more than a tangled mess of nerves and sanity. I caught glimpses of things that shouldn't be there. Shadowy figures lurking in alleys, eyes watching me from the corners of buildings, whispers on the wind. The world was unraveling, and I was powerless to stop it. I spent hours wandering the streets, searching for a way out of this madness. But every door led only to more questions, more terrors. I felt myself being pulled further into the abyss, until I was nothing more than a tiny, insignificant speck in an infinite sea of chaos. I stared into the mirror, my reflection staring back at me with eyes that were no longer mine. The darkness had consumed me, seeping into every pore and fiber of my being. I tried to speak, but my voice was barely a whisper, a faint echo of the person I once was. I lost track of time, unsure how long I'd been wandering the streets, searching for answers that seemed forever out of reach. The world around me had become a twisted maze, with no clear exit in sight. I felt myself becoming one with the darkness, my sense of self fragmenting into 1,000 different pieces. I was no longer sure who I was or what I wanted. All I knew was that I had to keep moving to chase the shadows that haunted me. I acted on instinct, my actions becoming more and more erratic. I hurt people, smashed things, and screamed at the top of my lungs. I didn't know why I was doing these things, but they felt right in the moment. I caught glimpses of myself in broken windows, shattered mirrors, and even the reflection of a puddle on the sidewalk. Each time I saw a different version of myself staring back, each one more twisted than the last. I began to wonder if I was still in control. Was I just a puppet on strings, dancing to the tune of my own madness? Or was I the master of my domain, weaving a tapestry of chaos and destruction? I didn't know anymore. All I knew was that I had to keep going to see where this journey would take me. The abyss had awakened within me, and it wouldn't be silenced. I stumbled upon a dark alleyway, the air thick with the stench of decay and rot. I felt a sense of belonging there, like I'd finally found my true home. I began to laugh, a cold, mirthless sound that sent shivers down my own spine. I looked around, taking in the twisted beauty of the alleyway. The walls seemed to writhe and twist, like living things. The shadows danced across them like demons performing a waltz of darkness. I felt myself becoming one with this place, merging with the very essence of the abyss. I was no longer separate, no longer distinct. I was the alleyway, and the alleyway was me. I smiled, feeling a sense of satisfaction wash over me. This was it, my true form. This was who I was meant to be. I stared at my hands, and what I saw made my blood run cold. They were no longer mine. The skin was deathly pale, the fingers long and bony. The nails were razor-sharp like talons. I felt a shiver run down my spine as I realized that the horrors had already begun to consume me. I tried to shake off the feeling, telling myself it was just a product of my own paranoia. But deep down, I knew better. I could feel it, a creeping sense of madness that threatened to consume me whole. I needed to stop the portal's destruction, no matter what it took. And so, I turned to an ancient ritual that promised to banish the eldritch abominations back to their own realm. The catch was human sacrifice, and for a moment, I felt a twisted sense of purpose. This was my chance to save the world, to make amends for my mistakes. I prepared for the ritual, gathering the necessary materials and studying the ancient texts. But as I delved deeper into the arcane knowledge, I began to realize that something was wrong. The words on the page seemed to shift and writhe, like living serpents. The symbols etched into the walls pulsed with a malevolent energy. I felt myself becoming one with the darkness, my soul slowly being consumed by the very horrors I was trying to defeat. I tried to push it back, but it was too late. The madness had already set in, and I was powerless to stop it. I stood before the altar, the ritual instruments laid out before me like a twisted crown. I felt a sense of dread wash over me as I realized that I was about to commit an unspeakable act. But I didn't care. I didn't care about anything anymore. I raised my hands to the sky and let out a scream of defiance. The horror that had consumed me for so long finally broke free, and I felt my soul shatter like glass. I stumbled forward, driven by a madness that was both beautiful and terrifying. I knew what I was doing, even though I didn't know why. And in that moment, I felt truly alive. I lit the candles and began the ritual. The air around me seemed to thicken, like a palpable mist that clung to my skin. I could feel the weight of my own soul being pulled towards the portal like a moth to a flame. I raised my knife and let out a scream of pure fury. This was it, the moment of truth. Would I be able to stop the destruction, or would I succumb to the madness that had consumed me? I didn't know anymore. All I knew was that I had to try. The air was thick with an otherworldly energy as I stood before the portal. The horrors that had been growing in strength all day were now at their most potent, and I could feel them closing in on me from all sides. I raised my knife, ready to face whatever lay ahead. But as I looked into the abyss, I saw something that made my blood run cold. The creature that was supposed to be defeated by the ritual was standing right behind me, its eyes fixed on me with an unspeakable hunger. I tried to turn around, but it was too late. The creature reached out and grasped my arm, its grip like a vice. I felt a wave of darkness wash over me, and everything went black. I opened my eyes to find myself standing in front of the portal once more. But something was different. The air seemed cleaner, the energy less potent. And as I looked down at my hands, I saw that they were no longer bony and razor-sharp. They were human again, warm and soft to the touch. I turned to face the creature, but it was nowhere to be seen. Instead, I saw a figure standing behind me, watching me with an unreadable expression. It was the person who had first brought me to this place, the one who had set me on this path of destruction. "You did it," they said, their voice low and husky. "You saved yourself." I turned back to the portal and saw that it was gone. The energy was still there, but it was no longer a threat. I felt a sense of peace wash over me and knew that I had found salvation. But as I looked down at my hands again, I realized that something was off. They were different. They seemed to be changing, growing longer and thinner, and then in an instant they were gone. I was left standing alone with no hands to speak of. I stumbled backwards, unsure of what to do next. But as I looked around, I saw that everything had changed. The world was different, the sky a deeper shade of blue, and I knew that I was still there, standing in front of the portal, waiting for something to happen. But what? I felt a hand on my shoulder and turned to see the person from before standing behind me once more. "Welcome back," they said, their voice dripping with malice. "You're home now."